Hello. Today is Monday, July 21st. Welcome to episode 478 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Advisory Board member Lester Munson. I'm joined today by senior fellows Morgan Vigna, Bishop Garrison, Amy Mitchell, and fellow Marc Raimondi. Folks, today we're going to talk about the prisoner exchange between the U.S, Venezuela, and El Salvador of last week. The trade was basically 10 Americans who were held unjustly in Venezuela for 250 Venezuelans who were being held in a Salvadoran prison, the famous Terrorism Confinement Center, or CECOT, run by President Bukele in El Salvador. 250 Venezuelans traded for 10 Americans last week. This is, of course, across the globe, there are a bunch of prisoner exchange issues and hostage exchange issues, Gaza being one of them. Also between the U.S. and Iran, this has become an increasingly significant part of international diplomacy. And now we see it in a very kind of broad way between the U.S. and Venezuela. Of course, U.S. and Venezuela do not get along. Generally, the U.S. has imposed many sanctions on Venezuela for the lack of democracy, authoritarian, the authoritarian regime of Nicolas Maduro, imprisoning people arbitrarily, squashing democracy, punishing his political enemies, that kind of thing. The U.S. has also suspended licenses for American oil companies to do business there. Venezuela could be one of the world's largest energy producers, but now it is not due to corruption and a lot of economic sanctions. So there's a extremely fraught relationship. A lot of people are wondering if this prisoner exchange could lead to a different approach between Washington and Caracas. Amy, I want to go to you first. What are your thoughts about this prisoner exchange?
Well, first, I think we all agree that having Americans back home is a good thing. And I know many of my fellows are going to bring this up. But I would say to the general public, when the State Department puts out a warning about a country not to travel there, that you do heed it, whether that's Venezuela, Afghanistan, Gaza, just take a knee on travel. That said, I do have concerns. The United States has been a beacon of hope for many around the world for democracy, for our rights. And I worry that some of the prisoners exchanged going back to Venezuela did try to claim some type of political asylum here in this country for, as you noted in the intro, what has been used against them, false imprisonment, really stepping down on any democratic efforts in the country of Venezuela. And I'm concerned that those people will be worse off even than they were in CECOT in El Salvador, as Maduro will use them as examples. So looking at it from a human rights perspective, glad that the Americans are home. Welcome home. But from a human rights perspective, I think we need to do a better job of really separating violent criminals and gang members from those who sought political asylum from the United States.
Bishop, agree or disagree?
Yeah, I both agree and have some level of dissent here. I just want to beat the drum to say that very happy to hear some Americans who were wrongly imprisoned overseas or back home, a flat out period. That is a good thing. I think this continues a precedent that has not been good, and definitely not just in this administration, but in at least the last 2, if not even longer. When we look at these, we have these high value targets, these individuals that we've had rightfully captured, detained here in the United States, and we end up trading them out for those individuals overseas who were wrongly detained. So I worry about that. I do worry, as Amy rightly pointed out, that you have 250 people within this population that we know are being sent back. And we don't fully have all of the details and information about their cases because they weren't properly adjudicated. So there's a part here. And then lastly, there's a bigger part, I think, Les, that you kind of hit on too, that since 2013, Venezuela's had some serious economic issues based on previous economy based on petroleum, and it's only been made worse after the global pandemic, after COVID-19. So you have people in these desperate situations that are trying to find better ways of living, and are trying to escape some type of externalities that are affecting their lives. Like, we just don't have enough information to truly understand how big of an issue this is. Are we going to be right back here 6 months again, looking to make some other type of deal in a similar situation because of the immigration policies and processes that are going on right now, and are Americans going to continue to be targeted overseas as all this is going on? Because this could be quite lucrative for authoritarian regimes to pull this type of trick. So that's why I'm kind of 50-50 on it. There's a lot here that is still moving, but time will tell, hopefully.
Marc, you agree with Bishop? There's some adverse consequences here potentially.
Well, I think Bishop raises some good points, and I think Amy does as well. And mind you, we're all going off of what's released publicly, right? Which is arguably limited information. But I'll just start out by kind of level setting, and I share Bishop's concerns that when we trade people for unjustly held people, and let's get to the terms. The U.S. government, if somebody is seized, one of our citizens is seized by a nation, we call them unlawfully detained people. Whereas if it's a criminal or terrorist group, we call them hostages. To the families, they're all hostages. So that's just what I'll call them. But when we trade for unjustly or hostages, what we're doing is we're effectively raising the price on every American head abroad. And I think that perpetuates a problem that, as Bishop pointed out, is not unique to this administration. The last couple of administrations have made some trades. Some of the trades have been horribly lopsided: arms traffickers, national security export violations. These are people who the U.S. government has spent years and millions of dollars to investigate, track down, arrest, prosecute, sustain appeals on. So as far as what I've seen on this deal, it actually looks like we got the better end of it, which is we traded 250 people that, according to the public information I read, had final orders of removal and have had their due process, for 10 Americans that were unjustly held. I think that the U.S. would have sought to deport these individuals anyway, so it was almost a freebie. And I also agree with my other colleagues here that anytime we can bring 10 Americans home to their families, it's a good thing. And finally, as Lester pointed out, this might be that act of goodwill that can be built upon to get the relations between the United States and Venezuela back on track.
Morgan, you want to, on the one hand, this and on the other hand, that, or do you want to go with one kind of overarching evaluation here?
I'm just going to dive right in and drop a fault line, and that is this. This is President Trump's just prime example of the art of the deal here, for all of the reasons that my colleagues have explained. It is a win for President Trump. This is actually the third prisoner exchange we've seen this year. Western Hemisphere, and particularly Venezuela, means very much to Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And so the fact that we were able to get so many Americans back, I think, was a huge win. I will also note that this is a huge win for President Trump, and particularly against the courts, and saying, hey, guess what? Third country deportations actually work. If you recall, we had tried to get Venezuela to take a lot of these migrants back much earlier in the administration. Venezuela, Maduro basically gave us the middle finger. Well, guess what? Now he's got 250 that he just accepted. So if anything, I think this is a huge win for the Trump administration. Whether it sets a really bad precedent in terms of, making deals with illegitimate dictators like Maduro, frankly, I think that is the trade-off that President Trump is willing to make here, especially when he gets the sort of the media hits and the moment, the photo ops of all these Americans coming back. I think that is a huge win. And so ultimately, you compare this to some of the really, garbage deals that President Biden made in years past, and I think by comparison, this is a huge win.
Morgan, why were they garbage deals?
Well, you take a look at going back to the Obama administration, in which we paid $1 billion for U.S. hostages by that regime. I think $6 million to pay to El Salvador is a real drop in the bucket comparatively. Also, you take a look at what we saw with Brittany Griner with the Biden administration. We exchanged arms dealers, like legit bad dudes, in exchange for a WNBA player who, got caught with, marijuana. So let's put it this way. I think this is a good deal. Previous deals, we sold out. And so this time around, I think President Trump really gets to flex and say, hey, listen, you want to make a deal with us? This is how it's done.
All right. I've got I think a slightly different take. I think overall, this is pretty positive for the administration. I will say we don't know who these Venezuelans are and what they did. And it is very possible there's some really bad actors in that group who may be on the level of the guy we traded for Brittany Griner. Who knows? If they're a bunch of gangbangers and brutal dudes, then this might be bad, especially if they're going to then try to come back into the United States. So that's a downside. However, getting 10 Americans back is hugely valuable. These things are never clear cut. It's going to be pretty gray, but I think overall, big win for the administration. And I'll go kind of American history nerd here. Our first government fell in part because we could not get Americans back from the Barbary pirates. The Articles of Confederation didn't work. We had a weak central government. Now we've got a government that can actually do deals and get Americans back. That is hugely important for a country to be able to do for its citizens. So at the end of the day, while there's some definite downsides potentially, overall, this is something a government has to do. I think President Trump does understand that. He's put together a team that emphasizes this. He's got good people working on it. And I think the fact that, where normally the administration is going to take a pretty hard line with Maduro on human rights and democracy issues through Secretary Rubio, the fact that we're willing to do this kind of hostage deal while also maintaining that tough approach on Caracas is a good thing. Okay, that's a wrap. Thanks always to Kelly Crowley, Taylor Lane, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us again on Wednesday, July 23rd for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. Check out our beautiful faces on YouTube if you get a chance, and please rate, review, and subscribe.